Well, our next speaker is also a remote speaker. It's like we're too scary to be here. You almost think so. She's a scientist working with the diagnostic team of the ECMWF. For the viewers online who doesn't know it, it's the European Center for Medium Range Weather Forecasts. And nowadays, not only weather, but also climate forecasts. But she's also working for the C3S. I hate abbreviations. Everybody know what 3CS is? Do you win something? Copernicus Climate Change Service. Probably someone who works there because the rest of the world doesn't know the abbreviation. She's on remote. Rebecca EMERTON, can you hear me?
I can.
Darmstadt.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I see you over there. Hi, Rebecca. Thank you for being here. I have a strange question.
Go for
What
it.
makes you happy working at C3S?
What makes me happy was that. Sorry?
What makes you happy working there?
It makes me happy
It's a strange question. Like, what's going on?
It's the opposite of the questions that I normally get asked. So yeah, you took me by surprise, but it makes me happy to be able to have access to this huge range of data to help people understand what is happening with the health of our climate around the globe.
And we're so happy to use those resources. And you're going to tell us something about how we can use that in media communication about climate, right?
Yes, absolutely.
The floor is yours. Rebecca.
Fantastic. Thank you. I'll just share my slides. Okay, I hope you can see that. It's great to be able to join you today to talk about the Copernicus Climate Change Service and some of the key resources we have on climate change communication. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person with you today. I know that at least one person in the audience knows what C3S is, but for those who might not, we aim to support society by providing information about the past, the present, and the future climate in Europe and the rest of the world. And we offer free and open access to climate data and tools based on the best available science. My name's Rebecca. I'm a climate scientist working with the climate intelligence team at C3S and ECMWF, and I work on the monitoring and the reporting of the climate. So today I'm going to give you an overview and some highlights from some of our resources and tools to give you an idea of the kind of information we're providing that's really aimed at a very wide audience, with some recent examples of the way we're evolving our outputs to communicate our findings. And some of our key resources include our annual global climate highlights, our monthly climate bulletins, our annual report on the European state of the climate, and our brand new tool, Climate Pulse. So starting with the global climate highlights, and as you know, the past 12 months have been record-breaking, with every month since last June recording the warmest global average temperature on record for the time of year. And 2023 was the warmest year on record. We're not short on data and statistics about our climate, and so a big part of our reporting and the resources that we're providing is really about choosing the right wording and the right graphics to really capture and explain well what is happening to our climate. And we really invest a lot of time on exactly this to make sure our reports and our graphics and visuals are accurately but clearly conveying the messages that we need to highlight. And so the Global Climate Highlights is really our first information to come out each year. Published once a year in early January, it provides C3S's first summary of the climate of the past full year at the global scale. We report on global temperatures, looking both at the increase above recent average conditions and the increase above pre-industrial levels. And we also report on regional variations in temperatures around the globe, as while the global average temperature is a really important headline indicator for the health of our climate, it's really important to consider variations around the globe and the impacts on more regional and local scales. Exactly as you saw with many of the fantastic examples Ed gave earlier of the use of climate stripes to talk about climate change all around the world. We also report on sea surface temperatures, El Niño and La Niña when relevant, on some extreme events, on sea ice in the Arctic and the Antarctic, and on greenhouse gas concentrations. And here you can see a new animation that my colleagues Julian and Anna worked on earlier this year. And this is showing the difference in Antarctic sea ice in each month of 2023 in the white and blue compared to the average. And you can see in the bottom right how much below average the sea ice was. And I think this was a really nice way to really convey a lot of information and data in a way that catches your attention and is hopefully easy to get the key message. And this is really something we're trying to do across our climate monitoring and reporting and our communications on the climate. So, for example, a key aspect of our climate monitoring that's really come into the limelight with the data and the records over the past year is our tracking of breaches of the 1.5-degree limit associated with the Paris Agreement. And this can be quite complex to communicate because we have to stress that the 1.5 and 2-degree limits set by the Paris Agreement are targets for the average temperature of the planet over 20 or 30-year periods. And the impacts of a warming climate do vary by season and by location. And passing these long-term global limits at any one time of year or any one place might not be of particular significance. But as the global temperature continues to rise and more frequently exceed the 1.5-degree limit, the cumulative effects of these exceedances will become increasingly serious, and we must carefully monitor and keep track of how rapidly we're closing in on these long-term thresholds. And so as we were tracking this last year, and of course continue to do so, this was something we wanted to highlight in our Global Climate Highlights report this January, and is another example of the way we're working to really evolve our messaging and reporting, is this statistic that 2023 marked the first time on record that every day within a year has exceeded 1 degree C above 1850 to 1900 pre-industrial level for that time of year. And close to 50% of days were more than 1.5 degrees warmer than the pre-industrial level. And I use this as an example of a message that we wanted to be able to highlight, and just that text is not the most striking way to do so. So Anna, our data viz expert, put together this graphic which shows you the same information, but I think is much more striking. And we saw this statistic picked up quite a lot after the report. And in fact, I learned from Anna recently that our brains are able to process visual information much faster than text-based information, with images processed as quickly as 13 milliseconds, which is 60,000 times faster than text-based information. And the images are much more memorable, which just goes to show the power of a good graph or chart. And alongside our key resources and our reports, our communications team and our press office provide a range of press resources and a dedicated space where you can find a whole wealth of information to help with communicating the findings of the reports. So this is just some screenshots from the press resources page for the Global Climate Highlights that we published in January this year. And you have information on the press conference live stream, press materials. You can download a range of graphics, visuals, and animations and the data behind them, social media materials, and more. And so moving on from the Global Climate Highlights, one of our other key resources is our monthly climate bulletins. And as the name suggests, every month we publish an update on key climate indicators for the previous month. And these are published usually between the 5th and the 10th of each month. And they cover temperature, sea ice, hydrological variables, and highlights of the month. And the reason we publish these updates on a monthly basis is that while we provide some in-depth annual reports, such as the Global Climate Highlights I just mentioned, and the European report I'll come to next, it's really important to monitor the evolution of the climate throughout the year. And I've included this chart here, which isn't one of our regular monitoring charts, but is one that you may have seen around in recent weeks, which was published as a highlight chart in our monthly bulletin covering May this year. Because for the first time, a 12-month period of global average temperature exceeded the 1.5 degree threshold at just over 1.6 degrees based on our ERA5 dataset. And this month has been an interesting one, not only because of these records, but to an extent because I guess some of the feedback that you hear on this data and the cognitive dissonance that some people may be feeling. For example, in Western Europe, where the very mild and wet recent weather seems a bit set apart from the global temperature records. And you can get a sense from some conversations and discussions and comments online that people are perhaps feeling a bit less connected to the information about the global temperature. And this is just one of the challenges of this kind of climate information, in that the global temperature can be a bit of an abstract concept to some, and it can be useful to also put that information into a local perspective. And each month, we have a press release that's circulated under embargo before the publication. So I've shown here an example of the press release for our recent May bulletin, which contains some highlight visuals, key messages for temperature, hydrology, and sea ice. And for the monthly updates that are published at the end of the season, we also have some highlights from the previous season as well. So the latest update contained highlights for the boreal spring or March, April, May season as well. And you've seen in the previous slide one of our key visuals for the latest update, and this is another one shown here, showing the daily sea surface temperature every day since 1979, covering 12-month periods from June to May, just to compare the extreme temperatures we've seen over the last 12 months. So each line is a 12-month period from June to May, with some past extreme years highlighted in yellow and blue. And then in red at the top, you see the last 12 months from June 2023 to May 2024. And we've shaded here the difference between the previous record for every day, just to really highlight how extreme the ocean temperatures have been and that they've consistently been this far above the previous highest temperatures. And here I've collected a few recent graphics from around the latest monthly climate bulletin that we published summarising May. So a big part of the reporting each month is choosing the content and the wording and the graphics that really best convey the data that we're seeing. And as I mentioned, we're always working to improve and evolve them. And I think one of the challenges that we've faced, but certainly I imagine many are facing, is perhaps this idea of record fatigue. Every month we're having to report that the global temperature has again set records. And at some point, do people switch off? How can things be so consistently record breaking? And often we have to remember that this is also news for us too. We're also experiencing and seeing these records for the first time along with everyone else. So we don't always have all of the answers right away. Of course, we want to know why we see what we see, and we do our best to answer this whenever we can. But sometimes we also need to conduct and rely on further research that takes more time to really delve into why some of these records and changes that we're seeing. So on the left were a couple of our highlight charts from our most recent bulletin and conveying some of the key messages. And while we have a whole range of routine monitoring plots that we rely on, we often do produce some bespoke charts each month, like the previous two that I showed, to really try and communicate the latest data in the best way possible. So the tweet in the middle was just one that we noticed that picks up the chart I showed in the previous slide of the ocean temperatures, which I agree is astonishing in its message, but it's great to hear feedback on how our message is coming across and what we're doing well or what we could improve. And on the right is also an example that we spotted recently that we really liked. And this was one from the Financial Times, who reimagined our data in a new way, flipping the direction we would normally show the chart. And in doing so, creating this kind of brilliant way of showcasing just how unusual the global average temperature was for every month of the last year, keeping it as the focus of the chart. And this information and data is the same as what you see in the set of bar charts on the bottom left, but I think it's a really striking and different way. And so it's great to see others also using our data in this really nice, innovative ways to spread these important messages. And we also know that we can learn a lot about communicating our data from learning from others' ideas and visualizations such as this. And the reason that we do what we do is to get information out there on our climate, accurate, authoritative information on the climate that's made available in a way that we hope can really be used to communicate what's happening to the health of our planet to everyone from the wider public to those making decisions that should be taken with consideration of the state of our climate. And since that's the reason we're doing what we're doing, it's been great to see that more than once this year, the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, has been citing C3S data and reporting when addressing the world on the topic and the urgency of climate change. And so the next resource that I wanted to mention is our annual European State of the Climate report. This report provides a lot of information on the climate of the previous year for Europe and for the Arctic. And the recent one was the 7th edition of the report covering 2023 and was released a few weeks ago at the end of April, and was also the first time we've collaborated together with the World Meteorological Organization to produce a joint report for Europe. And with this report, we've really taken a lot of the design and accessibility aspects to the next level. So the image that you can see here is a key example of the kind of evolution of the way that we're showing how our world is changing. And this is the design that's shown on the cover of our report, and it was created by Anna, our data viz expert, to try and grab people's attention to perhaps reach new audiences and increase engagement with the report. And like the climate stripes, we hope that they will help to start conversations around what they mean and therefore about climate change. And so these flowers represent real temperature data for Europe from 1980 to 2023, with the colours representing how much below or above average the temperature was in that year, similarly to the colours in the famous climate stripes. So each flower represents a decade, and the design was used to, of course, convey the urgency of a warming climate, but also to convey a kind of sense of fragility, some uncertainty for the future, with the petal for 2023 floating away, and of uncertainty for the future, and of course of the urgency of the situation. So it's been really great this year to kind of see how this artwork has started conversations, sparked questions, and been shared quite widely. And so to tell you a bit more about this resource, as I mentioned, it's published in April, which is obviously a bit after the end of the year, but that's because it's really a huge effort of data analysis. We cover many different aspects of the Earth system, from temperature and heat stress to wildfires, rainfall and rivers, glaciers, the ocean, renewable energy, and many more. The report's put together by around 110 scientists and contributors, who for the 2023 report analysed 58 different data sets, summarising Europe's climate in each of the broad range of chapters. And we've created about 200 charts to tell the story of Europe's climate in 2023, which are supported and highlighted by infographics on the key messages. And I'll show you a few of those in a moment. But of course, beyond the science and the report writing, for this, we also have a huge effort that goes into our media briefing, press releases, social media campaigns, and other articles and interviews. And so this is why it's published in April, as to analyse all of those data sets, many of which take a lot of time and effort to produce and finalise. It takes more time than what it's possible to monitor on a regular and near real-time basis, and involves a lot of collaboration and coordination with scientists in many organisations across Europe and around the world. So in early January, we have the first summary of the climate of the globe as a whole, covering some key variables that we have available from the ERA5 dataset in near real time. And then our annual European report, which really takes a deep dive into as many aspects of the climate and the Earth system as we're able to monitor and cover at the moment. So the report itself is a web-based report. You can find all of the information in the dedicated website shown at the top. And you can see a screenshot of that website here. So I mentioned a few of these many chapters looking at temperature, heat stress, wildfires, rainfall, glaciers, snow, and many more. So you can click on any of these icons to see the chapter of the report all about that aspect of the climate and to see the related charts and data. And we also have spotlight sections looking in detail at some of the key events of the previous year. And this year, for the first time, as part of the collaboration with the World Meteorological Organization, we have sections on climate policy and action with a focus on health topics. So extreme weather and human health, looking at heat waves, and climate resilience and adaptation for heat. And I mentioned it's a huge amount of data analysis. It produces a lot of information. So part of what's really important with this report is to take this huge amount of work and translate it into something that's digestible, meaningful information for a really wide audience. Of course, from the media, but also to policymakers and scientific research, and of course, the wider public. And we have a few ways of doing this. One is that the entire report is edited by our wonderful copy editor, Annabelle, who works really closely with the team to ensure that we're reporting the science in a way that's accessible to all, while remaining scientifically accurate and robust, and avoiding a lot of the jargon that you might see in some of the traditional science reports. So another key resource from this report is the summary PDF, which you can see on the screen, a preview flicking through the pages of the summary. So while there's a lot of information on the web pages, this summary really provides a short overview of every chapter of the report, giving some of the key highlights for Europe, the Arctic, and even a brief overview of the globe, and looking at extreme events, impacts, and long-term changes in the climate, all in a beautifully designed format. And this can also be downloaded from the web page. And another new feature that we launched for the first time this year to better explore the data and the information is this interactive page dedicated to extreme events. So this is a screenshot from the page, and you can click on any of these icons to get more information about that event. So this is just an example for the severe flooding that affected 2/3 of Slovenia last August. And you can read articles from the National Weather Services about the events and their impacts. And you can also filter the events by the type of event and the month of the year in which they occurred. And so I mentioned that we're also working on producing infographics and other resources focusing on the key messages from the report. And the one shown here is an example of one we produced this year, showcasing some of the key messages on the summer of Europe last year. So the red shading on the map shows the areas that were affected by heat waves and for how long. And during summer last year, we highlight that in Southern Europe, a record 41% of Southern Europe saw strong, very strong, or extreme heat stress at the peak of a heat wave in July. The map also shows large wildfires in 2023, shown as the circles, and we represent the data as such. In the 2023 wildfire season, an area the size of London, Paris, and Berlin combined was burnt by wildfires. And Greece saw the largest wildfire ever recorded in the EU, which was twice the size of Athens. And so to me, the statistics behind this of 500,000 and 96,000 hectares are a bit hard to imagine. But if you tell me there was a wildfire that was twice the size of Athens, well, that's quite astonishing to me. And so we also had a focus on glaciers again this year, as unfortunately glaciers in the Alps saw another exceptional year of ice loss, following a record loss of ice in 2022, and another winter with less snow than average and a strong heat waves over the summer, meaning that in the 2 years of 2022 and 2023 combined, glaciers in the Alps lost 10% of their remaining volume. And we chose to use this striking image of a glacier combined with the now well-recognized climate stripes to convey these important statistics about our melting glaciers in all regions of Europe. And of course, a major part of 2023 was the flooding. The year saw many flood events, from large events in major rivers to localized flash flooding. Flooding affected an estimated 1.6 million people in Europe last year, with at least 44 lives lost. And 80% of the year's weather and climate-related economic losses were due to flooding. And this animation was created to help highlight that a third of Europe's river network saw river flows that exceeded the high flood threshold at some point last year, and 16% exceeded the severe flood threshold, with some of the large flood events highlighted, which we discuss in much more detail in the main report. And so another big part of continuing to evolve and improve the way that we're presenting the science on our climate is that in the latest European State of the Climate report, we also introduced for the first time a whole new level of interactivity. So many of the charts that you'll find on the report website are fully interactive, with an example shown here for glaciers. We display the information with, again, the well-recognized climate stripes, but all of the information and the data are there to see and to explore. And following the release of this report, we always receive many requests for the data behind the charts so that the data can be explored and the charts reproduced, for example, in the style of a particular media outlet. And so we listened to this feedback and acted on all of those requests to make it easier to get the data. For almost every chart in the report, you can find this little download button in the top right, where you can download the high-resolution image as an image or a PDF. And you can also download in just a couple of clicks the data file for the data shown in the chart or the map. And this has been great. We've really seen a great uptake of this feature, with these charts appearing in news articles and media without the additional workflow for everyone involved of having to request the data and wait for it to be sent across. And so, of course, we also have an extensive press resources page available for the state of the climate. And I've put a few screenshots here, but we have links to the infographics, the summary, the press release, press kit, the recording of the media briefing, and loads of nice graphics and animations to download alongside the data that goes with them. And this gets updated regularly just ahead of the launch of the report each year and following the launch. And so moving on from the European State of the Climate report, I also wanted to introduce you to Climate Pulse. Climate Pulse is our brand new tool that we created and launched earlier this year, where you can explore daily data for temperature and sea surface temperature. It's completely interactive, so you can interact with the charts and change the display, move the globe around to a region of interest. You can download images and data, and the data is just a couple of days behind real time, so you can really get an up-to-date picture of the global temperature and ocean temperatures. And we've really seen a surge of interest among journalists and others in following the daily global temperature and the sea surface temperature, with an increasing number of requests coming to us to provide our ERA5 dataset at daily timescales in an accessible way, and charts and comments on the daily evolution. And so Climate Pulse is our response to this kind of exploding interest, to provide a simple but effective way to find out this information and to easily access the data that we were receiving many requests for. So I definitely urge you to take a look and explore Climate Pulse. I use it a lot myself too. It's such a quick and easy way to see this data, and it looks really nice. It's nice to be able to explore the data interactively. And we've had some great feedback that the charts shown in Climate Pulse have also been a great way to communicate, for example, with those who might be currently in a location that's perhaps experiencing average or below average temperatures at a given time. And so the headlines about the temperature records for the globe don't quite fit with their current experience, but it can be used to show that while some locations are seeing temperatures a little below average, much of the globe at the same time is seeing temperatures that are above or much above average. And so one of the last things I wanted to mention briefly is we also have a news page, and this contains some shorter articles about C3S work that might be of wider interest, latest findings, key events, and sometimes background information. So some of our recent news items include one on reconstructing D-Day weather using ERA5 data, the 12 months of record-breaking global temperatures, and a fact sheet explaining what heat stress is, how it's measured, and how we're monitoring it at C3S. And so I then just wanted to leave you with a short video of a couple of minutes with some words from Antonio Guterres, from our director, Carlo Bontempo, and our deputy director, Samantha Burgess, and looking back at some of the use of C3S data and reporting in the media recently.
The European Commission's Copernicus Climate Change Service are releasing official data that confirms that July 2023 is set to be the hottest month ever recorded in human history.
This year has been an extraordinary year. We got the warmest July on record, which happened to be also the warmest month on record. And this was followed by the warmest August, the warmest September, the warmest October, and in all likelihood the warmest November.
Our climate is changing, and it's changing drastically, and not only is this recorded in record temperatures around the world, but it's also recorded in the frequency and intensity of extreme events. And what we've seen in 2023 was 7 of the months of that year were the warmest months on record.
Sea ice extent was at its second lowest level on record for February, and sea ice concentration was lower than average in the areas shaded in red on the map around Western Siberia and Svalbard.
Our society urgently needs to improve its ability to effectively use the information, knowledge and data that climate science and services such as Copernicus Climate Change Service openly and freely provide.
And so I think I could probably not conclude it any better. So with those final words from Carlo, the director of C3S, I'd just like to say thank you very much for listening today. And I hope this could provide a useful insight into some of our climate monitoring and the resources we have available for communicating the latest science and data on climate change for Europe and around the world.
Well, Rebecca, wow, thank you. Thank you. Is there anyone in the audience who has a burning question? Burning, not burning. Okay, I saw some questions coming in online. There was one major question I can imagine that it lives widely. This is mainly Europe. There were some requests, is this also more available globally? Can you tell us something about that, Rebecca?
Yes, so we provide information covering the entire globe with maps covering all regions in our global climate highlights, with a regional breakdown looking more at other parts of the globe as well. Our monthly climate bulletins always include charts with global averages, but also with maps covering the entire globe. So you can really see what the current conditions and the state of the climate are in regions across the world.
Well, as someone else asked, how can I slow it down? Well, there are a lot of options. Also in the climate report, what can we do to slow down global warming? I don't think it's the moment anymore to go into that, but there are a lot of options. Make other choices, buy local, use less meat, and have more fun.